The gunshot echoed across the vast Arizona desert as Katherine Olsen's trembling hands clutched the smoking revolver. It wasn't supposed to end like this, with blood on her hands and the son of the territory's most powerful rancher lying dead at her feet. But when Edward Blackwell had cornered her in the stables with that vicious gleam in his eye, she'd had no choice. Now, as the dust settled around her in the dying light of 1878, Katherine knew her life in Fort Yuma was over. She moved quickly, heart pounding against her ribs as she gathered her meager belongings. The Olsen family name carried weight in Fort Yuma, her father being the town's most prosperous banker. But that wouldn't save her from the hangman's noose, not when she'd killed the only son of Jeremiah Blackwell, the man who practically owned half the territory. "Katherine!" Her mother's horrified scream pierced the evening air as Katherine stumbled into their grand house on Cottonwood Avenue. Eleanor Olsen's usually perfect coiffure was coming undone as she gripped her daughter's shoulders. "What have you done? The Blackwells are saying you murdered Edward in cold blood." "He tried to force himself on me, Mother." Katherine's voice was hollow, still numb from shock. "I defended myself." Her father, George Olsen, appeared in the doorway of his study, face ashen. "It doesn't matter what happened. No one will believe a woman over the Blackwells. They're already gathering a lynch mob." "You must leave tonight," her mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Far away from here." "And you'll come find me when this blows over?" Katherine asked, hope flickering briefly. Her parents exchanged a look that chilled Katherine to her core. "You don't understand," her father said coldly. "You are dead to this family from this moment on. The scandal would ruin us. We have your brothers and sisters to think about." "Father, please," Katherine began, but he raised his hand to silence her. "We will tell everyone you died of fever while visiting relatives in California. That's the only way the rest of this family survives." His voice was final, emotionless. "You have 1 hour to disappear forever." The next hours passed in a blur as Katherine took her father's fastest mare, a small pouch of emergency money her mother pressed into her hands, and rode north under the cover of darkness. Behind her, Fort Yuma's lights faded into the distance, along with everything and everyone she had ever known. For 3 days, Katherine rode through the unforgiving desert, rationing her water and sleeping in short bursts beneath the stars. On the 4th day, as both she and the horse were near collapse, she spotted smoke rising from a small homestead nestled against distant foothills. Her vision blurred as she approached, the mare stumbling beneath her. The last thing Katherine remembered was falling, the ground rushing up to meet her, and then a pair of strong arms catching her before darkness claimed her completely. When she awoke, she was lying on a bed of soft furs in a small but clean cabin. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, and a man sat in a chair nearby, whittling a piece of wood with practiced precision. "You're awake," he observed, his voice deep and gentle. "Was starting to worry you might never open those eyes." Katherine tried to sit up, but dizziness forced her back down. "How long have I been here?" 2 days. The man set aside his carving and moved to help her drink from a tin cup of water. "Name's Preston Archer. This is my place." As her vision cleared, Katherine took in his appearance. Preston was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the open sky. His eyes were a startling blue against his tan face, and his dark hair fell in waves to his collar. He wasn't conventionally handsome in the way the town boys had been, but there was something arresting in his weathered features, a quiet strength that made it difficult to look away. "Katherine Olsen," she replied automatically, then flinched. "No, just Katherine now. Just Kate." Preston's eyebrow raised slightly, but he didn't press. "Well, just Kate. You were half dead from heat and exhaustion when you rode up. Your horse wasn't much better. Lucky I was outside checking my fences when you arrived. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Archer. I won't impose much longer." "And where exactly do you plan on going, looking like you've been chased by the devil himself?" His question wasn't unkind, but it cut through her fragile composure. Katherine felt tears welling in her eyes for the first time since she'd fled Fort Yuma. "I don't know," she admitted. Preston nodded as if that was answer enough. "Well then, you'll stay here until you do know. I could use the help around the place anyway." "You don't know anything about me," Katherine protested. "I know you're running from something." His eyes met hers steadily. "And I know what that's like. Rest now. We'll talk more when you're stronger." In the days that followed, Katherine slowly regained her strength. Preston's homestead was modest, but well-tended, a small cabin, a corral with several horses, a garden patch, and grazing land stretching toward the distant mountains. He had cattle, not many, but enough to make a living, and he worked from sunrise to sunset to keep everything running. As soon as she was able, Katherine insisted on earning her keep. Years of being a banker's daughter hadn't prepared her for ranch work, but she was determined to learn. Preston taught her to tend the garden, to cook over an open fire, to mend clothes, all things her privileged upbringing had never required her to do. "You're a quick study," he commented one evening as they sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson. "Most city folks take longer to adjust." "I've always been adaptable," she replied, not meeting his eyes. She hadn't told him why she'd fled Fort Yuma, and he hadn't asked. That unspoken agreement of privacy was something she treasured. A comfortable silence fell between them as darkness slowly claimed the land. In the distance, coyotes began their nightly chorus, a sound Katherine had once feared, but now found oddly comforting. "There's a trading post about half a day's ride from here," Preston said suddenly. "I need to go tomorrow for supplies. You're welcome to come along if you'd like." Katherine hesitated. The idea of being around other people terrified her. What if someone recognized her? But the isolation was beginning to wear on her as well. "Will there be many people there?" "Just old Jack Turner, who runs the place, and maybe a few travelers passing through. It's not much of a settlement." She nodded slowly. "I'd like that." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Preston helped Katherine onto one of his gentler mares while he mounted his stallion, a magnificent buckskin he called Ranger. The ride to the trading post took them through rolling hills covered in scrub brush and cacti, with the occasional cluster of cottonwoods marking hidden springs. "How long have you lived out here alone?" Katherine asked as they rode side by side. "Going on 5 years now." Preston adjusted his hat against the morning sun. "Was a cavalry scout before that." "No family?" A shadow crossed his face. "Had a wife once. Sarah. She died in childbirth along with our son." His voice was steady, but Katherine could hear the old pain beneath the words. "After that, I couldn't stand being around people much. Bought this land and haven't looked back." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. "Life happens the way it happens," he replied. "Can't change it, just gotta keep moving forward." They reached the trading post by midday, a weathered wooden building with a hitching post out front and a small corral to one side. As Preston had predicted, it was quiet, with only the proprietor's mule and one other horse tied outside. "Jack Turner's a good man," Preston told her as he helped her dismount. "Known him since I settled here. He doesn't ask questions that aren't his business." Inside, the trading post was dimly lit, but well stocked with everything from food staples to tools, fabric, and ammunition. A grizzled older man with a magnificent white beard looked up from behind the counter and broke into a smile. "Preston Archer, been wondering when you'd show your face again." His eyes shifted to Katherine, curious but not intrusive. "And you've brought company. That's a first." "Jack, this is Kate. She's staying at my place for a while, helping out." Katherine nodded politely, trying not to show her nervousness. "Pleasure, miss," Jack said with a tip of his head. "Any friend of Preston's is welcome here." While Preston discussed his supply needs with Jack, Katherine wandered the small store, running her fingers over bolts of fabric, a luxury she hadn't realized she'd missed. She selected a length of blue cotton, practical for a new dress, and some thread. "That's a nice choice," came a female voice from behind her. Katherine turned to see a woman, about her own age, examining a shelf of preserved goods. She had a kind face framed by auburn hair tucked beneath a practical bonnet. "I'm Martha Wilson," the woman introduced herself. "My husband and I have a small ranch about a day's ride from here." "Kate," Katherine replied, omitting any surname. "I'm staying with Mr. Archer." Martha's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile remained friendly. "Preston's kept to himself for so long. It's good to see him with someone. Will you be in the area long?" Before Katherine could answer, the trading post door burst open, and a man in a trail-dusty duster strode in. His eyes scanned the room, lingering first on Katherine, then moving to Preston. "Archer," he acknowledged with a nod. "Reynolds," Preston returned coolly. "Didn't expect to see you this far north." The man Reynolds shrugged. "Following some strays. Thought they might have wandered this way." His gaze returned to Katherine, assessing in a way that made her skin crawl. "Don't believe I've had the pleasure." "And you won't," Preston said, stepping subtly between them. "We were just finishing up here, Jack. Mind putting those supplies together?" The tension in the room was palpable as Jack hurried to gather Preston's order. Reynolds continued to watch Katherine with unsettling interest, while Preston kept himself positioned protectively near her. Once their goods were packed and paid for, Preston guided Katherine outside with a hand at the small of her back. "Let's head home," he murmured. "I don't like the look of that storm brewing." There was no storm in sight, but Katherine understood the warning in his voice. As they mounted their horses, Reynolds appeared in the doorway of the trading post. "Careful on the trails, Archer," he called. "All sorts of dangers out there for a man and a woman alone." Preston didn't respond, just nudged his horse into a trot, with Katherine following close behind. They rode in silence until the trading post was well out of sight. "Who was that man?" Katherine finally asked. "Virgil Reynolds, works for a cattle baron named Blackwell who's been pushing north from Tucson." Preston's jaw was tight. "They've been trying to take over smaller ranches all through the territory." Katherine's blood ran cold at the name Blackwell. Could it be the same family? "Is he dangerous?" "He's killed men for less reason than looking at him wrong," Preston said grimly. "And now he's seen you." The implications hung heavy between them as they rode the rest of the way in watchful silence. When they crested the final ridge and Preston's cabin came into view, Katherine felt a surprising surge of relief, as if she were coming home. That night, as they ate their supper by lamplight, Katherine made a decision. "I need to tell you why I'm here," she said quietly. "You've taken me in, protected me. You deserve to know." Preston set down his fork and gave her his full attention. "Only if you want to tell me." So she did. She told him everything about Edward Blackwell's attack, the shooting, her family's betrayal, and her desperate flight north. Preston listened without interruption, his expression grave but not judgmental. "So you see," Katherine concluded, "I'm a murderer in the eyes of the law, and if that man Reynolds works for the Blackwells, it's only a matter of time before they connect me to Edward's death." "You defended yourself," Preston said firmly. "Any decent person would see that. The Blackwells aren't decent people, and my own family," her voice broke, "they called me dead to them rather than stand by me." Preston reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Then they're fools who didn't deserve you." The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "And for what it's worth, Kate, you're very much alive to me." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared loneliness, of finding unexpected connection in this harsh, beautiful wilderness. Katherine felt her heart quicken as Preston's thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. "We'll figure this out," he promised, "together." The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that Katherine grew to cherish. She and Preston worked side by side from dawn until dusk, mending fences, tending cattle, planting a larger garden than he'd bothered with before. She sewed curtains for the cabin windows and a new shirt for Preston from fabric purchased at the trading post. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk, sharing stories of their lives before, carefully building trust in small increments. Katherine learned that Preston had grown up on a farm in Missouri, had fought briefly in the final days of the Civil War as little more than a boy, and had spent years wandering westward before finding his place in the Arizona Territory. In turn, she told him about growing up as a banker's daughter, about her love of books and music, about the suffocating expectations that had always surrounded her in Fort Yuma society. "I never fit there," she admitted one evening. "I always felt like I was playing a part in someone else's story." "And now?" Preston asked, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. "Now I feel like I'm finally living my own life," she answered, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Despite everything, despite the danger, I feel more myself than I ever did before." Preston's smile was visible in the fading light. Freedom does that to a person. As summer deepened into autumn, Katherine found herself watching Preston when he wasn't looking the way the muscles in his back moved as he chopped wood, the gentleness in his hands as he tended to an injured calf, the rare but transformative smile that would sometimes break across his face. She tried to tell herself that what she felt was simply gratitude for his protection, but in her heart, she knew it was growing into something far more dangerous. One crisp September morning, Preston announced he needed to ride the northern boundary of his property. "There have been tracks I don't recognize. Could be nothing, but I want to make sure." "I'll come with you," Katherine offered. She'd become a confident rider over the past months, and the idea of being left alone at the cabin made her uneasy. They rode out as the sun was climbing above the eastern mountains. The air still cool enough to raise goosebumps on Katherine's arms beneath her borrowed jacket, one of Preston's that she'd taken to wearing on morning rides. The land stretched out before them, a patchwork of ochre and sage, with the distant purple shadows of mountains framing the horizon. "It's so beautiful out here," Katherine said, breathing in the clean, dry air. "I never noticed beauty like this in town." "It grows on you," Preston agreed. "First year I was here, I thought it was the loneliest place on earth. Now, I can't imagine being anywhere else." They rode for several hours, checking fence lines and water sources, until they reached a high point overlooking a shallow valley. Preston reined in his horse and dismounted, offering his hand to help Katherine down. "Best view in the territory," he said, leading her to the edge of the ridge. Below them, a small creek wound its way through the valley, lined with cottonwoods turning golden in the autumn light. In the distance, a herd of pronghorn grazed peacefully. "It's like looking at a painting," Katherine marveled. She glanced at Preston and found him watching her instead of the view, something unreadable in his expression. "Kate," he said quietly, "I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart stuttered. "Yes? Winter's coming. If you wanted to move on, find a town somewhere far from here, somewhere safe. I could help you get there, set you up with enough to start over." The offer was generous, considerate, and completely unexpected. Katherine felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Do you want me to leave?" "God, no," Preston answered with such vehemence it startled them both. He ran a hand through his hair, looking away. "But I don't want you staying because you think you have no choice. You deserve better than hiding out in a bachelor's cabin in the middle of nowhere. What if this is exactly where I want to be?" Katherine stepped closer to him, summoning courage she didn't know she possessed. "What if I've found something here I never expected to find?" Preston's eyes met hers, hope and uncertainty warring in their blue depths. "Kate," whatever he might have said next was lost as a rifle shot cracked through the air, sending dirt spraying at their feet. Preston reacted instantly, pulling Katherine behind the shelter of a large boulder as a second shot rang out. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver. "Someone's up on that far ridge." Katherine peered around the edge of the boulder and caught a glimpse of sunlight glinting off a rifle barrel about 200 yards away. Who would be shooting at us? Reynolds, maybe, or some of Blackwell's other men. Preston's face was grim. They've been pushing boundaries for months, trying to intimidate smaller ranchers into selling out. Another shot struck the boulder, sending stone chips flying. Their horses, tethered nearby, whinnied nervously. "We're pinned down here," Preston muttered, "and we're exposed if they decide to circle around." Katherine's mind raced. "The creek bed. If we could make it down there, we'd have cover all the way back to the eastern ridge." Preston glanced at her with newfound respect. "Good thinking. But it's 50 yards of open ground to reach it." "I'll draw their fire," Katherine decided. "I'm faster than you. I'll run for that cluster of juniper trees, and while they're focused on me, you can make it to the creek." "Absolutely not!" Preston's voice was steel. "I'm not risking you." "We don't have a choice," she insisted. "And I'm not exactly helpless, Preston. I've survived this long." Before he could object further, Katherine darted from behind the boulder, zigzagging toward the junipers. As she'd predicted, rifle fire followed her, kicking up dust at her heels. She heard Preston swear, then the sound of his return fire providing her cover as she dove behind the twisted trunk of a juniper. Heart pounding, she glanced back to see Preston making his way down the steep embankment toward the creek bed. Staying low and using the terrain for cover, Another shot splintered bark near her head, and she ducked lower. Once Preston reached the relative safety of the creek, he signaled to her. Katherine took a deep breath and sprinted the remaining distance, half sliding down the embankment to where Preston waited, his arms outstretched to catch her. They crouched in the shallow water of the creek, breathing hard. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen," Preston said, checking her for injuries. "Maybe both," Katherine admitted, the rush of danger making her lightheaded, or perhaps it was the way Preston's hands lingered on her shoulders, his face inches from hers, eyes intense with concern. "We've got to move," he said reluctantly, helping her to her feet. "Follow the creek bed. It'll give us cover most of the way. But we'll have to leave the horses." They made their way downstream, staying low and moving as quickly as the rocky terrain allowed. Occasional shots rang out behind them, but grew more sporadic as distance and the winding course of the creek made them harder targets. After nearly an hour of tense travel, they emerged from the creek bed near enough to Preston's property to see smoke rising from the cabin chimney. "Someone's there," Preston whispered, drawing Katherine into the shelter of a rocky outcropping. "Stay here. I'm going to circle around and see who it is." "We go together," Katherine countered, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I'm not letting you face this alone." Preston looked like he wanted to protest, but finally nodded. "Stay close and stay quiet." They approached the cabin from the rear, using the cover of the wooden shed and corral. As they neared, voices became audible, men talking and laughing inside Preston's home. "Found his woman yet?" one voice asked. "Reynolds is still looking," another replied. "Boss wants her found. Says she matches the description of that banker's daughter from down Fort Yuma, the one who killed his nephew." Katherine's blood turned to ice. Preston's hand found hers and squeezed reassuringly. "What's Blackwell want with some murdering woman?" the first voice asked. "Family honor? He promised his sister he'd see her son's killer hang." There was the sound of breaking glass, followed by coarse laughter. "Besides, from what I hear, she's a pretty little thing. Might be worth catching alive." Preston's jaw clenched, his grip on Katherine's hand tightening. "3 of them, from the sound of it," he whispered. "We can't take them head on." "The root cellar," Katherine suggested. "If we can reach it without being seen, there are supplies there, enough to last until they leave." The root cellar was a small underground storage space about 50 yards from the main cabin, concealed by a trapdoor covered with dirt and brush. They had spent several days in late summer stocking it with preserved foods and water in preparation for winter. Keeping low, they made their way through the tall grass toward the cellar entrance. Just as they reached it, the cabin door swung open, and a man stepped onto the porch, stretching. "Saw fresh tracks down by the creek," he called to those inside. "Might be heading this way." Preston quickly pulled back the brush, concealing the trapdoor, and helped Katherine down into the darkness below. He followed, lowering the door silently behind them, just as the sound of boots approached. In the dim light filtering through the cracks of the trapdoor, Katherine could see Preston's face, tense and watchful. They held their breath as footsteps passed directly overhead, pausing briefly before continuing on. "Nothing here," the man's voice called back toward the cabin. "Just that old cellar Archer uses for storage." "Keep looking," another voice ordered. "They can't have gone far on foot." The footsteps receded, and Katherine let out a shaky breath. The cellar was small, no more than 8 feet square, with shelves of preserved fruits and vegetables along one wall, and sacks of flour and beans stacked in a corner. A single lantern hung from a hook, unlit. "What do we do now?" Katherine whispered. "Wait them out?" Preston replied grimly. "They'll have to move on eventually. Blackwell can't spare men to watch one small ranch indefinitely." As darkness fell outside, the temperature in the cellar dropped. Katherine shivered in her thin dress, and Preston silently removed his coat to wrap around her shoulders. "You'll freeze," she protested. "I'm used to the cold," he insisted. "You're not." They sat side by side against the earthen wall, listening to the occasional sounds of movement above as Blackwell's men continued their search of the property. Eventually, those sounds grew less frequent as night deepened. "Try to sleep," Preston murmured. "I'll keep watch." But sleep was impossible with the danger so near, and Preston's solid warmth beside her. In the close confines of the cellar, she was acutely aware of him, the rhythm of his breathing, the faint scent of leather and pine that clung to his clothes, the way his arm pressed against hers. "I'm sorry," she whispered after a long silence. "If it weren't for me, they wouldn't be here." Preston turned to her, his face barely visible in the darkness. "Don't ever apologize for defending yourself, Kate. Not to me, not to anyone. But I've brought this danger to your door. Everything you've built here is just land and lumber," he finished for her. "It can be rebuilt. And what about your peace, the solitude you came here for?" Preston was quiet for a moment, considering. "I thought that's what I wanted. To be alone with my ghosts." His hand found hers in the darkness. "But then you showed up, half dead on my doorstep, and suddenly the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was just empty." Catherine's heart quickened. "Preston, I need you to know something," he continued, his voice low and intense. "If we make it through this, when we make it through this, I want you to stay. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you belong, with me." In the darkness of the cellar, with danger lurking just above them, Katherine found a certainty she'd never known before. She leaned forward until her forehead rested against Preston's, their breath mingling in the cool air. "I want that too," she whispered, and felt, rather than saw, his smile as his lips found hers, gentle at first. Then with growing urgency as months of unspoken longing poured into a single kiss. When they finally broke apart, Preston's arms remained around her, holding her close against the chill. "First thing tomorrow," he murmured against her hair, "we figure out how to get rid of our unwelcome guests. Then we start figuring out the rest of our lives." Katherine nestled closer, feeling safer than she had any right to under the circumstances. "I like the sound of that." Dawn brought muffled sounds of activity from above, horses being saddled, men calling to each other. Preston and Katherine remained frozen in their hiding place, hardly daring to breathe as footsteps crossed directly over the cellar door. "No sign of them," a voice reported. "They must have continued east." "Reynolds won't be happy," another replied. "He was sure they'd circle back here." "Well, they didn't. And I'm not spending another night in this God-forsaken place. Let's ride." They listened as the sounds of departure grew fainter, horses' hooves receding into the distance, voices fading until silence once again blanketed the homestead. Still, Preston insisted they wait another hour to be certain. When they finally emerged from the cellar, the morning sun was climbing in a clear blue sky, casting long shadows across the land. The cabin door stood open, and inside they found the evidence of the intruder's occupation: broken dishes, overturned furniture, Preston's few books scattered across the floor. "Could have been worse," Preston observed, surveying the damage with pragmatic detachment. "They didn't burn the place down, at least." Katherine moved through the small cabin, righting what furniture could be salvaged, gathering the broken pieces of Preston's life. "We'll set it right," she promised. Preston caught her hand as she passed, pulling her gently to face him. In the clear light of day, she could see the emotion in his eyes, determination, tenderness, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Before we do anything else," he said, "there's something I need to ask you properly." He took a deep breath. "I know we haven't known each other long in the usual way of things, but out here, time works differently. I've learned more about you in these months than I knew about most people after years." Katherine felt tears pricking her eyes as he continued. "I love you, Kate. I think I started falling for you that first day when you woke up in my bed and immediately tried to pretend you weren't half dead." His smile was tender. "I want to build a life with you, right here, if that's what you want, or somewhere else if you'd rather start fresh where no one knows either of us." "Are you asking me to marry you, Preston Archer?" Katherine whispered, hardly daring to believe what was happening. "I am." He took both her hands in his. "Though I don't have much to offer except hard work and this beat-up old ranch." "It's more than enough," she replied, her voice breaking with emotion. "It's everything." Their kiss was a promise of protection, of partnership, of a future neither had dared imagine before finding each other. When they finally separated, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "We still have a problem, though," he said softly. "Blackwell won't stop looking for you. Men like him don't just let things go." "Then we'll face him together," Katherine replied with newfound resolve. "I'm tired of running, Preston, tired of hiding. This is our home, and I won't let him take it from us." Preston studied her face, pride mingling with concern in his expression. "There might be another way," he said slowly. "A legal way to clear your name." "How?" "It would be my word against the Blackwells. No court would side with me. Not in Fort Yuma, maybe, but there's a federal judge in Prescott who's known for being fair-minded. Judge Hollister. He's no friend of the cattle barons." Preston's eyes lit with determination. "If we could get sworn testimonies about Edward Blackwell's character, about previous attacks on women, it might be enough to at least get a fair hearing." Hope fluttered in Katherine's chest, fragile but persistent. "Do you really think it's possible?" "It won't be easy," Preston cautioned. "We'd be taking on one of the most powerful families in the territory, but yes, I think it's possible." The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Preston rode to the trading post to send telegrams to contacts from his scouting days, men who had connections throughout the territory. Katherine wrote a detailed account of what had happened that night in Fort Yuma, painful as it was to relive. Word came back slowly, promises of help from unexpected quarters, bits of information about other women Edward Blackwell had assaulted, the name of a lawyer in Prescott willing to take their case. Through it all, Preston and Katherine worked side by side to restore the cabin and prepare for winter. They were married by a traveling preacher who stopped at the trading post, with only Jack Turner and the Wilsons as witnesses. It was simple and perfect Katherine in a blue dress she'd sewn herself, Preston in his one good shirt, their vows spoken under the vast Arizona sky. "I never thought I'd find happiness again after Sarah died," Preston confessed that night as they lay together in the darkness of their cabin. "I came out here to disappear, to just exist until I didn't anymore." Katherine traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "And I never knew what real happiness was until I found you. All those years in Fort Yuma, playing the proper banker's daughter, when all I wanted was something real. We'll build something real together," he promised, "something that lasts." As winter settled over the land, bringing rare snow to the high desert, they received word that Judge Hollister would hear their case in the spring. It wasn't a guarantee of justice, but it was a chance more than Katherine had dared hope for when she'd fled Fort Yuma all those months ago. The journey to Prescott in March was arduous but filled with a tentative optimism. They rode side by side, no longer fugitives but a married couple seeking justice. The town was larger than Katherine had expected, bustling with miners, traders, and government officials. Their lawyer, Henry Mercer, was a surprisingly young man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for taking on difficult cases. "It won't be easy," he warned them in his sparse office. "The Blackwells have already sent their legal representation, but we have testimonies from 3 women who were attacked by Edward Blackwell, and character witnesses who will speak to your integrity, Mrs. Archer." The use of her married name still brought a smile to Katherine's face. "And my family, have they been notified?" Mercer's expression softened slightly. "They have. I received a letter from your father stating that, as far as the Olsen family is concerned, their daughter died last summer. Though she had expected it, the confirmation still stung. Preston's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Their loss," he said simply. "You have a new family now." The trial lasted 3 days. Katherine testified about the night of Edward Blackwell's attack and death, facing down the hostile stares of Jeremiah Blackwell and his entourage. Other women came forward with similar stories of Edward's predatory behavior. Preston spoke of finding Katherine, of her character and courage in the months they'd been together. On the final day, as they awaited the judge's decision, an unexpected witness appeared, Martha Wilson from the trading post. She approached the bench with quiet dignity and told the court about her own encounter with Edward Blackwell 2 years earlier, an attack she had never reported out of fear of retaliation against her husband's small ranch. When Judge Hollister finally delivered his ruling, the courtroom was tense with anticipation. "Having reviewed all testimony and evidence," he declared in a resonant voice, "I find that Katherine Olsen Archer acted in justifiable self-defense against an unprovoked assault. All charges are hereby dismissed." The relief that flooded through Katherine was so profound she could barely stand. Preston's arms went around her, holding her upright as tears of vindication streamed down her face. "It's over," he whispered against her hair. "It's finally over." But Jeremiah Blackwell was not a man to accept defeat gracefully. As they left the courthouse, he confronted them on the steps, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't the end," he snarled. "No court ruling will bring back my nephew or wash the blood from your hands, girl." Preston stepped forward, placing himself between Katherine and Blackwell. "The law has spoken," he said evenly. "Your nephew attacked my wife and paid the price for it. If you or any of your men come near our land again, you'll answer to me." Something in Preston's calm certainty must have registered with Blackwell, because after a long, tense moment, the older man stepped back. "This territory's getting too crowded anyway," he muttered, "thinking of moving my operations to New Mexico." As they watched him stride away, Katherine felt the last weight lift from her shoulders. "Do you think he means it? That he'll leave us alone?" "Men like Blackwell care about power and profit above all else," Preston replied. "Fighting a personal vendetta against us doesn't serve either purpose. I think we've seen the last of him." They returned to their homestead as spring was painting the desert with wildflowers. The land seemed to welcome them back, more beautiful than ever after their absence. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Katherine rested her head on Preston's shoulder. "I was thinking," she said tentatively, "about expanding the garden this year, maybe adding a few fruit trees, and perhaps building an addition to the cabin." Preston glanced down at her, a question in his eyes. "We might need more room," she explained, taking his hand and placing it gently over her stomach. "By winter." Understanding dawned on his face, followed by a joy so pure it transformed his weathered features. "A baby? You're sure?" Katherine nodded, her own happiness mirrored in his expression. "Your child, Preston. Our family." His kiss was tender, reverent, filled with promise. "I never thought I'd have this chance again," he murmured. "A family, a future. We'll build it together," Katherine promised. One day at a time. As twilight deepened around them, she gazed out at the land that had become her home, not the ornate house in Fort Yuma where she had grown up, but this wild, beautiful place where she had found herself, found love, found belonging. Her family had called her dead to them, but Preston had called her his life instead. And in that love, she had been reborn. Years passed, transforming the modest homestead into a thriving ranch. The cabin grew room by room as their family expanded, first with the birth of their daughter, Sarah Eleanor, named for Preston's first wife and Katherine's mother, and then 2 years later with their son, James George. The children flourished in the freedom of the desert, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with the garden and the growing herd of cattle. Katherine taught them to read and write, to love books and ideas, while Preston showed them the ways of the land, how to read weather in the clouds, how to track animals, how to respect the harsh beauty of their home. On the children's birthdays each year, Katherine would write a letter to her parents in Fort Yuma, describing their grandchildren's growth and achievements. The letters were never answered, but she continued to send them not out of hope for reconciliation, but as a testimony to the life she had built, the happiness she had found. When Sarah Eleanor was 7 and James 5, a wagon appeared on the horizon one spring afternoon. Katherine shaded her eyes against the sun, her heart quickening with the wariness that never fully disappeared. "Preston," she called to where he was mending a corral fence. "Someone's coming." He straightened, hand moving instinctively to the revolver he still wore. But as the wagon drew closer, his posture relaxed. "It's just the Wilsons," he reassured her. "Probably bringing those chickens Martha promised you." But when the wagon reached their yard, it wasn't just the Wilsons who climbed down. A third figure emerged, an older woman in a plain traveling dress, her once auburn hair now streaked with gray. Katherine's breath caught in her throat. "Mother?" Eleanor Olsen stood awkwardly beside the wagon, clutching a small valise. "Katherine," she said, her voice thin with age and emotion. "You look well." The children gathered curiously behind Katherine as Preston came to stand beside her, his presence solid and supportive. "These are your grandchildren," Katherine said after a moment. Sarah Eleanor and James George. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she regarded the children. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "James has your father's eyes." "Why are you here?" Katherine asked, not unkindly but with the directness she had learned in her years on the frontier. "Your father died last winter," Eleanor replied. "And I couldn't bear the lie anymore. Couldn't bear knowing you were out here, alive, with my grandchildren, while I pretended to mourn you." She looked down, twisting her hands together. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness." Katherine felt Preston's hand on her shoulder, grounding her as emotions warred within her chest, old hurt and anger mingling with an unexpected surge of compassion for this diminished woman who had once loomed so large in her life. "You're right," she said finally. "You don't have that right. Not yet." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future. "But you're welcome to stay for supper, and we can see where things go from there." Eleanor nodded, acceptance and gratitude in her eyes. "That's more than I deserve." As Martha Wilson tactfully suggested showing Eleanor to the guest room to freshen up after her journey, Katherine remained on the porch, watching her mother follow Martha inside. Preston's arms encircled her from behind, and she leaned back against his chest. "Are you all right?" he murmured. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I never thought I'd see her again. Never thought I'd want to." "People can change," Preston said. "We both know that better than most." Katherine turned in his arms to face him, taking comfort in the familiar lines of his face, now weathered by years of sun and wind and laughter. "I'm not the same person she knew. I'm stronger now, happier." "You're Katherine Archer," Preston said with simple pride. "Mother, wife, partner. The woman who helped build this ranch from nothing. The woman I fall in love with all over again every morning when I wake up beside you." Katherine smiled, the lingering shadows of the past receding in the warmth of his gaze. "When you put it that way, how can I be afraid of anything?" Hand in hand, they went inside to face whatever came next together, as they had faced everything since that fateful day when a desperate young woman had collapsed at a lonely cowboy's door, each becoming the salvation the other never knew they needed. In the years that followed, Eleanor Olsen became a regular visitor to the Archer Ranch, gradually earning a place in her grandchildren's hearts and, more slowly, in her daughters'. She never returned to Fort Yuma, eventually settling in a small house in Prescott, where Katherine and her family would visit twice a year. The Archer Ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for its fine horses and the warmth of its hospitality. Travelers would speak of the remarkable couple who ran it, the quiet, steady cowboy, and his educated, spirited wife, who seemed to complement each other in every way. And on summer evenings, when the work was done, and the children were tucked safely in their beds, Preston and Katherine would sit together on their porch, watching the stars emerge above the land they loved. Their hands intertwined as they whispered plans for tomorrow and gave thanks for today. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but home.